Thank you very much, Ed. Excuse me. Well, it's a real pleasure to be here with this wonderful panel. And I want to say I'm more than just a migrant, former migrant. I'm a migrant professor. I've spent a lot of time teaching in many universities. It's a pleasure to be here with the panel, of course, and to review your presentation. You have basically laid upon us a big challenge, and that is to look at the problem, and you have defined the problem very extensively. I picked up several points there. The gap that you talk about is tremendous. I think we'll address that. I think it gets worse over time from K through 12. I think that's a significant part, especially as it pertains to the rural Latino student. Another challenge or part of the problem you identified was society, how society assumes things are happening in the family. And so I think that helps create this multiple aspect of the problem. The cost of education is another aspect of that. But before I go into how we see the problem and how we look at some of the solutions that you have presented, I'd like to just add a couple of more things about our panelists here. One of the, everyone, we're dealing with a population in which, if you're an educator, you realize that everyone has a sign of greatness early on in life. Correct in that sense? So Judge Gutierrez, I'm told, was one of the best workers in the fields when he was growing up. He wanted to be number one. So I think that was kind of the beginning of what he did. As you know, he went on to earn his GED, which is an unusual way to eventually become a judge. It's not your standard protocol, but that was kind of the beginning. Judge Gutierrez is truly a community leader in every aspect of the phrase community leader. So he's really been there for the community. J.J. Saldana, his knowledge and understanding of the issues that we are addressing here today are particularly relevant and timely. So Juan is what or JJ is what I would refer to as a foundational type of leader in the Latino community. And of course, Liliana has is a woman for all seasons, what I consider that. Liliana is actively engaged in strategic initiatives in the greater Latino community, and she speaks with knowledge and passion. So this is our panel today, and I want to begin with one initial question, and that is, I'll begin with you, JJ, and that is, can you share with us your own experience at any level over the years in rural life, either as a child or as a student or as an adult, that might shed some light on what works best for rural Hispanic students?
Well, I think part of my job is I go on Spanish radio. I try to go on at least 2 times a year I like to do it around the time change because that's when I remind parents to also check their school records, the child's school records. But one thing that I find in rural is that a lot of the rural districts, they lack customer service. They don't, and I always have to remind schools that the parents and the students are the customer. And so if a parent doesn't understand English and goes into a school and they run into a grumpy secretary, that's going to be what they're not going to want to go back because they've already had that bad experience. And if they don't speak English, chances are that they probably didn't have high level of education beforehand. And so going into the school, they're already nervous going there. And then running into the grumpy secretary on the front desk who doesn't help them is not going to do them much good in getting them to go back. Parental involvement is key. We offer the parent-school partnership training that's through the MALDEF, which is the Mexican American Legal Education Defense Fund. And that has been so successful in rural areas. The Blackfoot School District has taken it on, and they've done some great stuff. Glens Ferry Schools did it. Mountain Home has done it. Nampa actually had some parents, their school district, the MALDEF, came in and took a couple of their parents to their national conference because they were so impressed because it increased their PAC, their parent advisory groups. And so I think that's great, but I think customer service is key. We have a lot of these schools, I think, that think, oh, they don't speak English, they're just going to go away, their problems will just go away. And it's, one, it's wrong. Two, We just need to inform, we as community leaders or so-called leaders need to inform parents that, don't just go away, keep looking for resources.
Terrific response there. Focusing primarily at the entry level when people reach out to the community, to the schools, the key people at the beginning there really need to be trained to be more sensitive to that.
Yeah, customer service is key, and it irritates me when I see schools that do that, especially after you've already told them, look, you have this grumpy secretary. She's still here and she's still grumpy. I'm not saying get rid of her, but maybe teach her some customer service skills, or for him.
That's a very important point. Liliana, how about you? Can you speak to that question of your perspective?
Yeah. So I grew up in rural Idaho, and much of the research that I read really spoke to me because, we see that decline in middle and high school. And I really started thinking about my personal experience. And my personal experience in rural Idaho in a rural school district was very negative when it came to getting into the later grades. My social climate at school through the administrators was actually very negative, and experienced a lot of discrimination and racism. And unfortunately, that hasn't changed in that rural school district as I continue to experience that with my family. And so what really makes me think about some of the things that we need to address is making sure that the social climates of our schools are welcoming and engaging to our Latino students. And what I have seen from my personal experience and continue to see with the students I work with and throughout my family is that it's actually a negative experience. And when we really talk about positive youth development and what are the things that are needed for youth in general to succeed, that sense of belonging is huge. And if we don't have those in our school, then students aren't in a learning environment where they are ready to learn. And when it's coming from the schools where they're having an unsafe learning environment, that is a huge thing that we need to address. And so I think for me, having personal experience with that and continuing to see my students struggle with some of those aspects, those are some things that I think we need to take seriously, and we need to train our school administrators and our school staff to be culturally competent and understand how to outreach to families and how to work with our Latino students so that they do have a safe learning environment and they do have that sense of belonging, which is one of the huge key aspects to positive youth development.
Terrific. Now, I see you as a role model in what you do. So can you go further into the role that role models might have in those same schools?
Yes, most definitely. I think one of the other things that the research points out is the lack of working with Latino community leaders with the school districts. And those things are key because that gives the student somebody to look up to and somebody to go to be able to address some of these issues. And so role models and mentors are also, the youth-adult partnerships is also key in positive youth development. And so we need to have positive Latino role models in these schools that they can look up to and be able to aspire to, and as well as being able to have somebody to go and say, hey, I'm experiencing this problem, and how do I find a solution? And so the teams that I work with, I think, have been extremely successful because they have people that they can go to and trust and ask questions, and they have somebody to aspire. One of my students once told me, gave me a call because she had an assignment to interview a professional, and she said, Miss Liliana, can I interview you? I have an assignment to interview a professional, and you're the only professional I know. The problem is that I was the only Latino professional that she knew, the only professional in general that she knew that she could call upon, and that needs to change. I was glad that she at least had a professional she could call upon, but how many families out there wouldn't have been able to do the assignment because they don't know somebody? And so in this case for this student, luckily she did know me and was able to interview me, but that needs to change. They need to have several role models that they can look up to and aspire to and contact when they need to.
So that comes across to me as a resource to address the question of career guidance. Maybe it's an informal channel, but very important as a resource that maybe schools are not utilizing. And so that's becoming a resource for helping young students basically understand where they want to go, right? So I want to ask a similar question to Judge Gutierrez here, along the lines of your experience with maybe growing up and what worked or didn't work in a rural context for Latino youth.
Well, I'm a lot older than these folks. So my experience growing up was really operating in a sink or swim situation in rural. This was in New Mexico, and being new to a language, to a system of education. There's so much coming at you that you felt frustrated, and you were having to rely on other students to kind of interact and interpret for you. I don't know that things have changed much. I think we have our educational system that has been structured to address a certain, as Juan indicated, or JJ now, a certain client population. And so we're working on the adjustment of changing over to the increase in the Latino Hispanic youth in our rural communities. And so we are at a big disadvantage because we don't have the professionals that have been prepared to then address the needs of this population. So to me, I think we're not going to be able to quickly produce language and cultural competent teachers to work in these rural school districts, but we can begin to do some in-service training for teachers to get them better prepared for not only addressing the needs of the students, but addressing the needs of the parents. You have to address both. And to me, I think that is where the ongoing success will lie. In terms of the students, and let me just give you some examples. If you have a teacher who has had this kind of preparation, you will walk into that room and you will notice the atmosphere or the signs, the art, the bulletin. It will have a look that is relevant to all the students, not just some of the students. When you start looking at curriculum, you'll have curriculum that would include information that is relevant to that child's experience. So it's critical that we begin to work on what I would call more structural areas that prepare teachers to meet the needs of the students and of the parents.
Excellent. I want to follow up with you, Judge Gutierrez, on any initiatives, current strategic initiatives that you feel that you're aware of in the community that you think will give direction to the community. Is there anything out there that's happening today on behalf of the Latino community and by the Latino community perhaps to advance the Latino issues on education?
You know, one of the things that I sense in terms of our educational atmosphere is that I think there is now a sense of freedom being felt by educators and school districts to be more creative. And so in that vein, what I have seen is that certain school districts have begun to invest in engaging the Latino parents such that they seek not only to give them information, but to seek their input. What would they like to see in terms of what the schools are offering? And so just that step begins, that kind of communication, which is two-way communication, begins to develop a trust from which then the success of the students will grow. Some small things like the you see, and maybe this has nothing to do with the increase in Latino students, but the increase in the United States and our society becoming more interested in for instance, soccer. What does that do to a situation in high school where where students are not involved in extracurricular activities? When they begin to connect with extracurricular activities, the chances of dropping out then lessens. So those are things that are taking place just naturally in our communities, and so in terms of being strategic, what I think school districts need to do is to take advantage of the freedom to be more creative and develop programs. A lot of times they may involve not having things in the school per se, but going out to the community. it's not uncommon to have the Latino community find themselves more comfortable at the Catholic Church, for instance, and create some kind of activity there for the parents and engage the parents. The other thing that I see happening is our Latino, this is not educational institutions, but now our Latino, what you might call college students, who are looking down to serve their fellow brothers and sisters who are in elementary and middle school and high school. We see more of those things happening with groups like the Latinos in Action, with which are high school students, with the Future Hispanic Leaders of America, which is also a group in high school. The organizations in the colleges of Latino students, they are becoming a resource for volunteer. And so the school districts need to take advantage of those, even more so in the rural areas, because I think that's where they can make the greater impact.
Your comments point to strategic activities and actions in the community that's going to further these relationships between the communities, within the communities. One point I wanted to mention is, seems to me part of what you're saying is there's a lack of cultural awareness out there. And if we're not fully aware of the culture aspects of the community in which you operate, then you're not going to be able to create the right kinds of relationships with the students to link them to existing community activities. So what I'd like to do is ask you the same question about initiatives that you're aware of, that you're doing, that would further this effort.
So I know that there's the Idaho Leadership Institute that's working on several initiatives. And, you know, I think what school districts can definitely do better and more often is link to Latino leaders and Latino organizations and create true partnerships. And what that means is that there's a benefit for both and not just one-sided, where it's like we're going to use your expertise and your resource but not compensate the organizations. I think that's a huge problem. We have Community Council of Idaho, we have Mujeres Unidas de Idaho, we have the Hispanic Caucus, we have several Latino organizations that serve as experts and would be willing to work with school districts to better those relationships with the Latino community. And so I think one of the things that I know the University of Idaho 4-H program provides is cultural competency training on how to engage Latino families. And that needs to happen not only at the teacher level, but really at the administrator level as well, because you need to have buy-in all the way through. So that needs to happen at all levels. And so I think being more engaged in those efforts. I do know that currently, you know, just this Saturday, with a partnership of several organizations like Community Council of Idaho, College of Western Idaho, University of Idaho, Department of Labor, are putting together a Hispanic healthcare conference and manufacturing where we're really getting these kids engaged with what the research says, which is career exploration, right, at a younger age. And so it's really open from middle school all the way through college. And so those type of initiatives and those partnerships can really create those platforms for students to learn about career exploration or be motivated to continue their education. And that's just a partnership of Latino leaders from different organizations coming together to put on this conference. And we started with no funding, but we're very successful in getting funding. And I think all it takes is collaboration. And what I would love to see more often is collaboration between Latino-led organizations and school districts to figure out what are the needs in our communities, and then let's address those. And this is just an instance of success where several organizations said what's the need in our Latino community, and career exploration, as the research has indicated, is a huge need. And we said, okay, let's address it. Obviously, it's in the Treasure Valley, so what I would love to see is expand into the Magic Valley and Eastern Idaho, where our other Latino students are also highly concentrated, and make sure that they have access to these programs.
Can I ask a question on a follow-up?
Yes.
So we all know that the data is pretty dismal when it comes to Latinos in classrooms and in administrative positions. So the career exploration is huge, but how do we begin to fill the talent pipeline for specifically to get teachers in the classroom and administrators that are Latinos?
Okay.
So the question is, to repeat the question, is really how do we get develop a talent pipeline to get more Latino teachers and educators into the schools?
So that's an excellent question. We start early, working with our youth. So right now we have a 4-H program at a low-income housing community over at Farmway Village, and those students we're developing those students for that pipeline. Some of them have various interests in different careers, but you have to start early in order to get them interested in those careers, and you have to provide the education, the quality education, the leadership, and the mentoring that these students need in order to be able to go into that pipeline. And so I would say that's key is to creating successful programs where we can mentor youth and make sure that they're successful, because those are the students who are going to go into that pipeline of giving back to their community, going into teaching education careers, and so that's how we develop that pipeline. The other aspect that I want to point out is it's important that we not only develop bilingual staff and administrators, but bicultural, because a lot of times what we run into is schools will hire folks that are bilingual but are not necessarily bicultural, and then run into issues of, well, they're not having success working with the Latino community, and it's really important that we understand that the bicultural piece is, if not more important than the bilingual piece, because those are the administrators and the teachers who are really going to understand how to work with Latino audiences and with that culture. And so developing them at a young age, that middle school, high school age, we should already be working with those kids to feed them into that pipeline so they can come back and work with our schools.
I think that's a very excellent question. Ed, do you have a question? Yes.
I just wanted to piggyback on your comment, Liliana, and mention that I had a chance to talk with one of Liliana's students who was a high school student in that pipeline who wanted to be a teacher. And the important kind of observation for me about the role that community service plays and that Liliana's program played is that he was already, as a junior in high school, getting an idea of what his hoped for eventual occupation involved in terms of managing kids and so on. And I have full confidence that he's going to be very successful in college and as a teacher because of the early head start in the pipeline. And I think that's I think surely Latinos in Action model can also very specifically strengthen the success of people who think they might want to be teachers and discover they really can do it. Okay. Sí se puede.
And I'm happy to report that student is currently a college student at the University of Idaho.
Great. I bet he is doing great, too.
Yes.
JJ, I'd like to ask you the same question around basically the talent pipeline.
Well, you know, what I think is important, too, to kind of just piggyback on what she just said, too, is there's a huge amount of paraprofessionals that are Hispanic that are working already in the school. And so it'd be great to see, you know, some help to get them, you know, to take some courses so they can get their degree to become teachers, because as it is right now, we see a huge amount of work just getting thrown at them, and they're making very minimum, and then, you know, they're doing a lot more work, and they're the ones that are the bilingual and bicultural ones in the school system. And, you know, our agency offers free competency trainings, cultural awareness, cultural sensitivity. We bring in experts to come and do these trainings. And a lot of times, which is really, really sad, is that's who the schools send us to do these trainings, are the paraprofessionals who are already bicultural and bilingual. You know, the people that really need to come to these are usually the superintendents and on down, the people who are in the leadership levels. By sending us our people who are already bicultural, it's just kind of saying, let's just put a Band-Aid on it, saying and kind of a check on their list, but they really should be sending you know, a lot of the principals, a lot of the superintendents. And, you know, I've worked with Liliana on some cases, and we know for a fact that those are the ones that really do need the bicultural, cultural competency training. And so I think I'd like to see more people take us up on it, because it's a free service that's provided by the Department of Education, and we just, it's not me that does the training. We actually bring in experts from all over to do these trainings.
If I may just add, in response to the question by Blossom, and that is that I don't think I would be here today if it wasn't for the kind of program, teacher education program, that JJ is talking about. In 1976, BSU got a grant to start a bilingual ed program, and so they went to the Nampa School District and identified paraprofessionals. I was working as a teacher's aide, and several others it wasn't just Nampa, it was in Canyon County primarily. And so I think almost maybe 80–90% of those who were recruited graduated with a degree in elementary education, if not the bilingual certification. So it was a great match. You're already there, you're doing the work, but you don't have the degree and the full extent of training. So it created an opportunity that many of us took advantage of, and so I think it needs to, that's one way to do it. I think the other is we need to talk about the psychological factor. As I was working in the schools, I remember when I shared with a young group of fifth graders, Latinos, Spanish speakers, that I was attending BSU for the purpose of becoming a teacher, and the reaction by one of them was, "That's impossible." And I followed up and I said, "Well, why do you say that?" And he says, "Because look around. Are there any Mexican teachers in this school?" And there was one, but she didn't have a Spanish surname, so he didn't recognize her, perhaps. But you know, it's an issue of projecting and seeing yourself as a professional in that field. And so I think we need more targeted, as they say, career type of presentations and dialogue and activities and programs. I attended the CUNA School District career program about a month ago in I think it was middle school, and I did what that young boy did back then when I was attending BSU, and so I looked around to see how many brown faces I saw, and it was only me. So we need to be able to be more visible, and sometimes in response to the collaboration, I think as Latinos we have kind of sat back too much and waited for folks to come to us. I think we need to take the initiative and go out there and make ourselves available so that we can be part of those career programs, so that we can be part of the mentoring programs, and so in that sense create a pipeline that doesn't have gaps in it, but that there's a support system from the time they start school on through college. And so I think we need to be more assertive in that regard.
Great. A topic that Ed Kissam comes to again and again in his paper is the issue of adult education. So my question to you is really, and I'll start with Liliana, what do you think communities can do to better address the issue?
So that's been a long-standing issue since I can remember as a little girl, and I think consistency is key. Whatever adult education programs we offer, we need to make sure they're consistent and they're quality. I remember as a little girl my dad trying to learn English, and the program would start up and then it would stop, and then he'd have to find another program, but he'd have to wait several months to years before he could start another program. Then he'd try again, and then Juan and I were actually discussing earlier, the content was basic. So advancing his English skills was very difficult because when they were starting back up again, they were starting again from basic levels. And so I think what we need to do as a community is make sure that adult programs that are offered are sustainable and are consistent, and that parents aren't running into this problem of starting and stopping. And I think that that's one of the things that we can do is making sure that we offer quality educational programs for adults who really do want to learn English, who really do want to learn and better themselves so that they have more applicable job skills as well. It needs to apply to what they're doing now, and learning some life skills for these adults that they can apply back at their workplace, or to advance their work skills so that they can get better jobs and not be maintained in those low-income minimum wage jobs, would be huge for them. I've had parents say, well, I work doing yard work, so can I take classes that would advance my skills in that area? They want programs that are relevant and will advance them, and so that would be an example for me, is making sure that maybe we couple those together.
Wow.
Another thing that I think is key in this is our agency, we do what we call community visits, and so we visit a lot of the different rural areas, and that's one of the things that always comes up. They tell us, well, we would like to see more adult education, and so when we contact the nearest higher ed institution, they tell us, well, we already have something in place. So I think communication is key. ISU found out that they had a huge list of people in Aberdeen that wanted to take some classes, but they just never connected. The same thing happened in Burley. CSI had some classes available in the community, and so they just need to, we just need better communication all across the board. The colleges and the community just needs to, I think, have better communication.
The outreach is critical, so that they can clarify what is available and folks being able to take advantage of it. We talk here about the subject of inequality of education, and on the flip side of that, I was thinking of the program, and I don't know if it's active anymore in terms of funding, but Even Start, which in essence dealt with children who were being educated, and the parents also receiving education. Very successful in my view. I visited the program, the one that was in Caldwell at the time, several times, and just found that the parents, non-English speakers, were very grateful and were very consistent in attending the classes that were being offered. Going back to my comment earlier about schools being more creative, I see that Western Ada, I believe that's the name, Western Ada School District is collaborated with the College of Western Idaho to bring computer literacy, English classes to the Latino parents there in their area. And so it's something that with those two organizations or institutions working together are providing a great service, and those classes are very well attended. So more I guess along the lines of collaboration.
Perfect. So as we get closer to our concluding our program today, I have a question here regarding performance of students from your experience. Do you have any thoughts as to why student performance drops so sharply for Latino students, especially rural students, from elementary school on to high school?
I think we've done a really good job as far as like the Hispanic leaders have done a good job as presenting the importance of parental involvement. But where we have failed, though, is continuing parental involvement after elementary school. I always, when I talk to parents, I say it's important that you're involved even through college, just because it shows that you care about this student's education. So I think parental involvement is key. I think we're seeing a lot of that. But I also see, and especially when it comes to rural areas, it goes back to what I said initially was the customer service. I've seen a lot of cases where, I saw a child. The parent ended up just moving the child from Idaho to Texas to live with his brother because he just felt, his father just felt that he just didn't trust the Idaho school system anymore because they wouldn't reach out, they wouldn't do anything, and it was just a constant fight. And I've seen a lot of that happen. So I think there's a trust issue, I think, as with the system. There's customer service skills, but I think parental involvement is key.
And that would be the parents of the Latino
students,
youth.
yeah. And I think we see a strong parental involvement all the way through elementary school, and then once they get to like the junior high level, it kind of starts to drop down. By the time they get to high school, it really drops down.
And do you have any thoughts on exactly what's happening there? Why?
I think as the child gets older, the parent, I think, kind of feels, okay, they're older, I don't need to keep being, and I think they also feel a lot more comfortable in an elementary because it's not a higher level of education.
It almost seems to me like there's this unspoken rule, or unwritten rule, that in our society, at a certain stage, we are supposed to let go of the kids and they're independent. We don't get involved with their education anymore as Latinos. And so I don't know if that is a message that comes in the way that we operate within our schools, or if it's just a perception from our community. But certainly it is noticeable that there is that lack of involvement at the higher grade. The other thing that needs to be taken into account is, in the report identifies the socioeconomic situation, is that there is more responsibility placed on these students economically and otherwise for taking on adult responsibilities, and that draws you away from your studies. I mean, if you're to keep up those grades, to stay on top of things, after a while you get so far behind that you kind of just are going through the motions, and you might graduate, but your level of achievement is not what it should be. And so we need to be very cognizant of that, because we can create a supportive system that allows students to be employed if they need to be, but also to keep up with their studies.
So part of your proposal solution here is that we need to start being more proactive on the community side and solve the problem.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yes, I think there's, the social cultural component of that, making sure that kids feel welcome, that their culture is valued at that middle and high school level is a huge key, that sense of belonging, but also that economic responsibility, that the burden of having to take care of younger siblings, the burden of having to economically support the family. And not that college students or high school students from these families don't want to volunteer, but when they have to choose between a job and volunteering, the job always wins out because they have to support their families. And so creating programs that provide stipends to youth where they're not having to work at McDonald's or the fields where they're not gaining those life skills, but talking to funders about making sure that they do allow for stipends for volunteers from low-income communities, because that's where they're going to build the life skills when they are able to do internships and have some service learning opportunities with organizations where they can really develop their skills outside of the classroom is a huge key. And I think that middle school to high school, that's when we start seeing them kind of have to start supporting families and take a different role. And not enough funders out there are willing to allow for monies to go to low-income families to volunteer to gain those life skills, because they have to choose between supporting the family and getting an income or volunteering, and supporting the family and getting an income always wins out.
One follow-up question to you, and that is, how do you get parents involved?
Oh, yes, very, very good question. And I think you start with building a relationship with the kids, and through the kids, you get parental involvement. And I think the other issue that we have is parents don't understand the pathway to college. And so if we start educating our parents about that pathway and what they can do to be engaged in their students' education, then they start becoming more involved. And it's not because they don't want to be involved, but there's a lack of information or misinformation with these parents as to what that engagement looks like. So doing some classes for the parents and educating them about what parental involvement looks like at your middle and high school level is a great way to do that. And you start through the kids. You build a relationship with those kids. You start to get to know the parents, and then you start offering classes for parents, and before you know it, you have the entire family involved. And that's really the key. You have to engage the family. Otherwise, you're not going to be successful.
So to that same question, then I'd like to ask you, Judge Gutierrez and also JJ, as a parent, how do you get involved with your children's education?
Me as a parent, or you're asking me about how a parent today would get involved?
Well, I'm asking you about how your model.
I think and there's good intentions on parents that we look to education as a priority, as important. But then what we may miss out on is doing those things that then sends that message or affirms that message to the child. And so for me, it was attending the events, the activities that my kids were involved in school. And that is a challenge for parents who might be lacking in transportation to get there. And so those we have to realize those and find ways of connecting. Sometimes we call the comadre or the compadre, that kind of getting together. So you find a way to do it, but you have to encourage that. The other one is the education of children. If we try to place it all in one basket and say it occurs in the school setting, then we're going to fail, because the education takes place both at home and at school. And going along with what Liliana had indicated is, how do we prepare the parents then to be that support system for their child at home? Fortunately for me, I was attending university, so I had some idea of kind of things that I could do with my kids. But imagine someone who hasn't had that exposure and may be lacking even written material at home that can be utilized, storybooks and the like. So it is really about going beyond looking at the education in the school setting, but how can we empower our parents to be that support system for their children, with whether it's materials, whether it's helping them coordinate for attending events to support the kids. Also creating support systems within children themselves. I find that if you ask one child, do you want to go read? The response, especially if it's a male, the response is going to be what? No. But if you ask them, do you all want me to read you a story? It changes the dynamic. And then if you can move then on and say, well, is someone brave enough that you want to read this page? And so you build on it. And so it's really sort of a dynamic and energy that flows to get them involved and buy in, and then you create that, which is the most important thing that it's all about, is creating a love for learning in that child, and that's your objective.
So your response is really an example of this concept you were talking about, the adult education. Part of the adult education is teaching parents how to parent, perhaps, in a certain way, and linking them to the educational system. But it's part of the education process.
Yes.
So your thoughts, JJ?
I think Liliana's great. We utilize Liliana in our agency who is going to help host something, because parents are like, we'll host an event, we'll invite Liliana's youth group, and I know that she'll get the parent permission to go there because they trust her. So building trust, I think, is key, because we had a youth retreat last summer, and they have to spend the night in a hotel, and that's a huge deal in our community, especially when they're coming from rural areas, to allow their child to come to Boise, the big city, and then spend the night, without any parents there. That's a huge deal. So we had some parents who were like, well, they can go to the training, but we're going to go pick them up, drive an hour away home, and then bring them back in the morning. That was just a big deal. But, when we have youth groups like Liliana's group here, the parents are like, oh, Liliana's going to be there, so that's fine. They can stay the night. So it's building that trust with parents, because if they don't have that trust, then the child's going to end up suffering when it comes to these kind of events, school stuff, because they won't be able to travel for a sporting event or for whatever extracurricular activity because they don't have that. And that even goes into the higher ed. We've had parents that will tell us, well, I don't want my daughter to go all the way up to Moscow to school because what if she gets pregnant? And my response is always like, well, what if she gets pregnant in Burley? You still have a pregnant child. At least in Moscow, she's getting an education. And so you have to build that trust. And I have to say the University of Idaho camp program has done really well up there in encouraging parents to let their children to go up there. The camp counselor there gives them her personal cell phone number for anything. So she's constantly on the phone with parents. So they do a really good job up there. But trust is my thing.
Good.
We have one question from the audience, and we probably just have time for one more question.
Yes.
Before wrapping up, and that question is, Liliana talked about bilingual versus bicultural earlier. Would a teacher cultural exchange program help with the cultural aspect?
Oh, most definitely.
You want to repeat the question?
Yeah,
Because
so the question is, I talked earlier about bicultural aspect of staff, and would a cultural exchange program help with that? And I think any time that we can widen our perspective and gain a perspective of a different culture and understanding, that definitely will help. So cultural exchange, the reason those help so much is because you are then able to be part of a different culture, and you're able to widen your perspective, and you're able to see through a different lens. And that's really that bicultural piece, why that's so important, is you're able to see from multiple lenses. And so when you only come from your own culture and you see things from a certain lens, you sometimes aren't able to see things because you're looking through that lens. And when you're bicultural, you're able to see things from multiple perspectives. So having a cultural exchange definitely helps, because that helps widen your lens, and it actually gives you a different perspective and teaches you to look at things from multiple perspectives. And cultural guides are great as well. If you aren't able to do cultural exchange, because I know that could be hard, having reliable cultural guides that really do know the community are also very helpful, because you can bounce ideas off of them, and they can help guide you through that process. And in fact, it's actually recommended that you have at least 3 cultural guides, because then you're getting different feedback. And if you're hearing the same message from the 3 cultural guides, then you know you're good to go.
good. So we have time for one more question, and I'd like to ask kind of you probably about 30 seconds or so per response. And the question has to do more with the role of public policy leadership in the legislative process. Have any thoughts on the role of the legislature around public policy issues around education for the community like this? And I'll start with you, JJ.
Well, one thing that I've been in talks with over at the Department of Education is they have an Indian ed coordinator, but they don't have a Hispanic ed coordinator, and our population's a lot bigger. And so it's like we're asking, why do you not have one? I'll find out from Sherry Barr next week when we meet with her, and she's aware of it. As of right now, she seems willing to talk about it, so I think that's an important thing. But, having a Hispanic education coordinator at the Department of Education, I think, is crucial right now, considering how fast our population is growing, specifically in that age group.
Okay, very good. Liliana.
I think one of the key things that the report pointed out is a state financial aid for our undocumented students. And I think that's a policy that needs to be taken out at the state level with our legislators, is making sure that we do offer state aid to those students so that they are able to continue their education. And so I think policies like that. And then, having in all organizations, whether it's the universities or at the school districts, having those administrative level positions to advise on Latino outreach and engagement is going to change the school district. And I would always encourage more than one, just because then you have multiple supports and multiple advice. Good.
Well, something brought out in the report, which I think is critical, and that is the funding of counselors, so that they're not overwhelmed, because it's not just a question of having teachers who are language and culturally competent, but also counselors. And then to add to that, the fact that they may not have enough time to meet with the students. You can see how a Latino student or Spanish-speaking student or limited English-speaking student may not bother to follow up if the situation is such that he sees the counselor so tied up and can't really pay attention to him. So funding for that work is critical.
Thank you, each of the panelists, JJ, Liliana, Judge Gutierrez. It's been a pleasure to work with you, and thank you, Ed Chasm, for your presentation. Thank you, everyone, for joining us in this discussion.